news. The Judicial Service Commission says it is going ahead with next week's judicial interviews without MK Party member Dr. John Hlophe, the leader of the MK Party in Parliament. Hlophe has been interdicted from attending the interviews pending a review of the National Assembly's decision to designate him to that committee. The party is expected to appeal the decision by the JSC to proceed with the candidate interviews. Joining us now is Research and Advocacy Officer at Judges Matter, Mbekezeli Benjamin. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon and for giving us hopefully some clarity on these issues, Mbekezeli. Let's just remind our viewers how this decision first started, and it was made in the Western Cape High Court, which obviously interdicted Hlophe from being part of the JSC.
Good afternoon, Michelle, and good afternoon to the viewers. Yes, so this basically started when Parliament in July designated Dr. John Hlophe as a member of the Judicial Service Commission. And immediately afterwards, the Democratic Alliance, certain civil society organizations, including Corruption Watch and Freedom Under Law, they all went to the Western Cape High Court to challenge Parliament's decision. So at the core of this is the Parliament's decision to designate him on the JSC. And that was an urgent application, and they split it into two parts. The first part dealt with whether they should stop Dr. Hlophe from participating in the interviews that will be happening next week. So that's the first part. The second part is the bigger question of whether Parliament acted rationally in designating Dr. Hlophe. That part will still be dealt with. The Western Cape High Court last week only dealt with the first part. And what they said was that Dr. John Hlophe may not participate in the interviews or in the JSC proceedings, even though he still remains a member. The question of his membership is still going to be decided. But at this stage, the interdict is just to stop him from participating.
And what do we make of the National Assembly's decision that didn't see any issue with Dr. John Hlophe being part of the JSC, given what he's been found guilty of?
So what the DA is arguing is that the National Assembly acted irrationally in designating Dr. Hlophe, who has been found guilty of gross misconduct and was subsequently impeached from office. And they say that it was irrational. Parliament or the National Assembly had to seriously consider those factors before arriving at a decision, because that would be in line with their constitutional obligations in terms of Section 165 of the Constitution. But Parliament argued to say there is no written requirement for Dr. Hlophe or for any other member before they are designated as a member of the JSC. In fact, the convention is that the political parties nominate anyone and that person can be put forward. The Western Cape High Court last week said Parliament cannot just simply rubber stamp the names that are put forward by the political parties. It has to do more. The court didn't elaborate what that more is necessarily, but they said the obligation, the constitutional obligation on the National Assembly, is that they really should apply their mind on who they decide as a member of the Judicial Service Commission.
Yeah, and that was actually my next question to you, Mbekezeli. You talk about the Western Cape High Court in its decision to grant this interdict, saying that Parliament cannot just rubber stamp the candidates that are put forward by political parties. It needs to do more. And surely that makes sense, doesn't it?
It certainly does make sense, Michelle. And in fact, we as Judges Matter, before even Parliament voted on this, we urged Parliament to seriously consider the people that it puts forward for both the Judicial Service Commission and the Magistrates Commission, because both bodies play an incredibly important role when it comes to the appointment of judges and magistrates and holding them to high ethical standards when they are in office. So we believe that those bodies should be made up of people of high ethical standards, people who would increase the credibility of those institutions, because ultimately they decide on people who will take very important decisions about our lives, or all aspects of our lives. And so we thought it would be important for Parliament to apply its mind But, well, the vote went the way it went, and we sort of accepted the vote that Parliament made, but obviously other political parties and other organizations challenged that in court, and that challenge still remains. So I must emphasize here, Michelle, that Dr. Hlophe remains a member of the JSC, and so Parliament can't simply replace him or substitute him, because that decision it still remains. So they've designated him, he remains a member. Only if they decide to recall him would they be able to put forward a different name. But at this point, he still remains a member. The only thing is that the court order says he may not participate.
And when do we go back to court insofar as this issue is concerned?
So we don't know for now when the second part of the case will be heard. But one of the conditions that the court had put forward for Dr. Hlophe's participation is that another case that was brought by AfriForum at the Constitutional Court, that case should be resolved, and the Western Cape High Court case should also be resolved before he may participate. Yesterday, we heard from the Constitutional Court that they dismissed the AfriForum case because the lack of jurisdiction. And so now what remains is for the Western Cape High Court to set down the second part of the case, and this will finally resolve the issue of whether Dr. Hlophe may be a member of the JSC or not. I anticipate that it will be either very late this year or early next year.
And so for now, the JSC proceeds with interviews of more than 50 judicial candidates. Of course, it's also very interesting because the candidates also include judges vying to replace John Hlophe as the Western Cape Judge President. And among them is his former deputy, Patricia Goliath.
Yes. So next week's session of the JSC will in fact be the biggest round of JSC interviews that we've seen since the COVID period. And so there are a lot of candidates that are coming up, including the Judge President of the Western Cape High Court. Of course, because of the conflicts of interest inherent in that decision, Dr. Hlophe would have naturally had to recuse himself from that one. But there are other courts that will be interviewed at the same time. What the Western Cape High Court said last week is that because there's still this question mark about Dr. Hlophe's suitability to be a member of the JSC, if he were to proceed and participate in the rest of the interviews, then that would affect the credibility of the interviews. And that's why they said it's better if he doesn't participate now while the court proceedings are dealt with. We've heard also yesterday, Michelle, that the MK party requested a postponement of those interviews. The JSC, according to media reports, of course, they say that they will still proceed. I don't think they would have had any other option but to proceed, because currently, from a reading of the law, there's nothing that is stopping them from proceeding. But also because of the disruption that it would cause to postpone these interviews, I think it was a prudent decision on their part to go ahead.
Yeah, certainly. And the JSC does agree with you, it would seem. Mbekezeli, Benjamin, let me thank you for your time this afternoon.